Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm very pleased to welcome my close friend and the governor of my home state, the great state of Texas, Governor Greg Abbott. Governor Abbott.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. I want to thank you for stepping forward and providing leadership at a time when there is a growing vacuum of leadership in national security. You've done that with a law that you have already proposed in the Terrorist Refugee Infiltration Prevention Act. I believe that law fulfills two goals of this nation and of our state, and that is it ensures the ongoing ability for citizens in Texas as well as around the country to pursue charitable ends to help those who are in need. Well, at the very same time, ensuring that states are going to be able to keep their communities safe and secure. Second, I want to thank you for the work that you and your staff have done on very short notice to come up with a new piece of legislation that you are unveiling today, the State Refugee Security Act. What happened is that my office opened up a line of communication with Senator Cruz's office late last week. And in short order, Senator Cruz's office was able to put together a bill that would empower states and governors to have even more tools to be able to address the refugee challenges that the states are having. And these are challenges because both the federal government and the refugee relocation organizations are not following the laws that have already been passed by Congress. Now, it's important to emphasize that the threats to America's security are difficult to assess. If you recall, the day before the Paris attack, the President of the United States came out and said that ISIS was contained. The week before the San Bernardino attack, the President said there was no credible intelligence indicating a plot on the homeland. So ISIS's capabilities have eluded even the President of the United States. That is why Texas and other states are doing even more to ensure that we safeguard the security of the citizens of our states. Equally important, the threat to America's security is very real. The FBI director told Congress that the federal government simply cannot conduct effective security checks on Syrian nationals. The director of national intelligence spoke directly about the threats that are posed by refugees. He said that, "I don't put it past the likes of ISIL to infiltrate operatives among the refugees." And then just this week, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCall, said individuals tied to terrorist groups in Syria have already tried to access our country through the refugee program. And then, compounding these dangers, the president himself has granted waivers allowing into the United States refugees who provided material support to terrorists. Well, America is a charitable nation, but we cannot allow charity for some to compromise the safety for all. That is what has happened by the way that the federal government has interpreted and applied the Refugee Act that already exists. The current Refugee Act has been interpreted and applied in ways that compromise the safety and security of people in Texas as well as other states across the country. And it's contrary to the way the law was written. The law specifically states that Congress intended to give states a substantial role in the refugee relocation process. The federal government and the resettlement agencies have ignored and sidestepped that role. Senator Cruz's legislation strengthens the role of states and governors to ensure the safety and security of our citizens. My top priority as the governor of Texas is to keep the citizens of Texas safe. With Senator Cruz's new proposed act, I'm better equipped to accomplish that goal. So thank you, Senator Cruz.
Thank you very much, Governor, and thank you for your extraordinary leadership. Governor Abbott and I have worked together for many, many years. For 5.5 years, you were my boss when you were the Attorney General of Texas, and you served our state tremendously well as Attorney General, and you are doing an even better job as Governor, providing strong leadership for the state of Texas at a time when the challenges continue to get greater and greater. We are today at a time of war. We've seen the attacks in Paris. We've seen the attack in San Bernardino. ISIS and radical Islamic terrorists have declared war on America, even if President Obama refuses to admit it. And they are waging war on America. ISIS represents the face of evil. They are crucifying Christians. They are beheading journalists. And they have stated their intention to murder as many Americans as possible. Unfortunately, in a time of war, we have a commander-in-chief who refuses to acknowledge the enemy, much less confront the enemy, much less do what it takes to defeat the enemy. President Obama recently went overseas and said he doesn't believe in American leadership or America winning, that he doesn't have time for that. I think the American people want to see leadership in this country, and they want to see America winning again. Following the attack in San Bernardino, the President did a nationally televised address, the entire course of which he never said the words radical Islamic terrorism. And unfortunately, this politically correct blindness is impacting the policy decisions of this administration. One consequence is that we have no strategy, as President Obama has told us several times, to defeat ISIS. ISIS is getting stronger because the President refuses to lead and do what it takes to utterly destroy them. But another consequence of the politically correct blindness is President Obama's proposal to bring tens of thousands of Syrian refugees to this country, even though his own head of the FBI has told Congress that the Obama administration cannot vet these refugees to determine whether or not they are ISIS terrorists, whether or not they are jihadists. That should be the end of the matter. The first obligation of the President is to be Commander-in-Chief to keep this country safe. But unfortunately, this President is not willing to carry out that role. A partisan political agenda dominates. And even though the FBI tells us, as Director Comey put it, they don't have the information on which Syrians are affiliated with ISIS, which Syrians are jihadists, and so they can query the database until the cows come home, and it will produce no results. Even though the FBI told the President that, his political agenda moves him to go forward. Since the beginning of the Syrian refugee crisis, more than 2,300 refugees from Syria have already been admitted to the United States, many of them to Texas. And the President intends to bring in 10,000 more this fiscal year. That's roughly a third of the 34,000 total refugees the President proposes to accept from the Near East and South Asia regions. The President has also informed Congress that he intends to accept as many as 25,000 refugees from Africa as well. This week, at least 21 Syrian refugees are scheduled to arrive in Texas. and perhaps hundreds more are anticipated to arrive during the next year. This makes no sense. We should not be bringing in refugees when our own FBI tells us we cannot ascertain whether or not they are ISIS terrorists. We know that at least one of the terrorists who attacked Paris came in with the refugee program. We know that ISIS has stated it intends to carry out similar terror attacks here in America. And we know also that one of the two terrorists who committed the worst act of Islamic terrorism on U.S. soil since the Fort Hood terrorist attack in our home state of Texas, we know that at least one of those terrorists came in on a fiancé visa, the female terrorist. And the vetting for the fiancé visa was the very same vetting that President Obama tells us will keep us safe from ISIS terrorists coming from Syria. We know that this female terrorist filled out a fictional home address on her fiancé visa, and yet the Obama administration's vetting did not discover that. And even though these individuals had had numerous contacts with people on the terror watch list, even though the female terrorist had communicated with ISIS terrorists on social media and had pledged her allegiance to the Islamic State, the Obama administration failed to anticipate it, failed to stop this attack, failed to do what was necessary to keep us safe. If the commander-in-chief won't act, then it's incumbent on Congress to act. There are a great many American people that are eager for the final year of the Obama presidency to come to an end. But in the meantime, Congress has an obligation to act to keep America safe. There are three pieces of legislation I've introduced that I urge leaders in Congress to take up and pass immediately to address this terror threat. The first piece of legislation Governor Abbott just described is legislation that would impose a 3-year moratorium on the refugees coming from countries where ISIS or al-Qaeda control a substantial amount of territory. This is legislation that is targeted directly to the problem. And the reason is simple. We have been told by the FBI they cannot vet these refugees. And our first obligation should be protecting our national security. The second piece of legislation Governor Abbott mentioned is legislation that I filed today that will protect the authority of the states and the authority of governors to keep their citizens safe. And it would say that in the event the president wants to send refugees to a particular state, that a governor has the ability to opt out, to conclude that the federal government has not done a sufficient job ensuring that the safety and security of the citizens of a state will be protected, and so to decline to settle those refugees in that state. Some 30 governors across the country have stood together following the lead of Governor Abbott, standing together as one, saying their obligation is to protect the safety and security of the citizens of Texas and the citizens of each of the states that have elected those governors. Those officials are doing their jobs. They're honoring their commitments to the men and women who elected them. We need a president who will do the same. It is my hope that Congress will take up and pass into law the legislation that I introduced today that gives governors the ability to opt out if the federal government is not sufficiently vetting refugees to ensure that they are not a terror threat. And then the third piece of legislation that I have tried to bring up in recent weeks and that Democrats have blocked is the Expatriate Terrorist Act, which provides that if an American goes and travels abroad and joins ISIS and takes up arms and wages jihad against the United States, that he or she forfeits their U.S. citizenship. We should not be allowing ISIS terrorists to come into America with a U.S. passport and wage jihad against innocent citizens. All of these are reasonable, common sense steps to keep America safe. And if President Obama is not going to lead, then it is incumbent on Republicans and Democrats in Congress to stand up and say, we know our top obligation is keeping the men and women of this country safe. We know that our top obligation is doing everything possible to prevent another Paris attack, to prevent another San Bernardino attack, to prevent the next attack. Because as long as the federal government is not doing its job, we know there will be another and another and another. We face an enemy who has stated their intention to bring death to America. And we need that same strength of resolve and leadership in the United States to keep our citizens safe. And with that, we will take any questions.